My name is Jack Marks, and I have decided to answer the question, how much has the recent decrease in tourism affected US GDP? Now, it is important to find an accurate answer to this question because tourism is a substantial percentage of America's overall GDP, so calculating the change in this sector will help assess the overall health of the domestic economy in comparison with previous years. This is an economics question because it relates to the supply and demand for goods and services within the tourism sector. Though many of you are already aware of COVID, I feel it is a necessity to provide some background information to better understand the circumstances in question itself. So, COVID is an airborne virus that officially reached America in January of 2020. Since then, over 200,000 Americans have died from the virus, which, as it relates to my question, has drastically decreased consumer spending on all types of travel, which has subsequently decreased the GDP. So here's a graph by Trading Economics that shows the change in US GDP in billions by year. So in 2019, the GDP was 21,427.7 billion US dollars, and in 2020, that has dropped to roughly 20,700 billion US dollars, for a drop of 3.4% as a result of the pandemic. So here is a second visual by Oxford Economics that shows the US travel industry losses and how that impacts the US GDP. So through December, we can see a $502 billion GDP loss. So this statistic makes up exactly 2.3% of the 2019 GDP, which certainly aligns with the 3.4% drop in overall GDP as previously discussed. So there are a few limitations that would from allowing me to answer this question effectively. Number one, it's impossible to exactly recreate pre-COVID market conditions such as price and quantity. Number two, the lack of information and knowledge as an introductory level econ student to acknowledge every single component within the industry. Number three, GDP excludes production of American firms in foreign countries selling travel-related goods and services, which would minimize the perceived loss. Gross national product, or GNP, would be a better indicator of economic growth in this situation. So assumptions, there are a few. Number one, there are many unknown variables outside of the travel industry that could increase the overall GDP impact of the pandemic. For example, the decrease in consumer spending on travel has decreased consumer spending on non-necessary goods for travel industry workers because they've had their wages cut. Number two, consumers have determined through opportunity cost that the risk of catching COVID outweighs the pros that come with traveling. Number three, through marginal analysis, consumers get less marginal utility out of traveling because of pandemic precautions, which has led to less enjoyable trips. Number four, because COVID is so easy to contract, people who choose to travel actually function as a negative externality because they are being exported or exposed to people they wouldn't have otherwise been around. As people return from their trips, they spread the virus further, causing others to become ill. So, how confident am I in my answer? Well, I feel confident in my answer because my data was collected by highly reputable economics entities, one being Oxford Economics and the other being Trading Economics. Aside from that, the 2.3% of the 2019 GDP is less than the total 3.4% drop in overall GDP. My only concern is that that only leaves 1.1% of additional overall loss in GDP. Though tourism is one of the largest U.S. industries, it seems off that one industry would account for 2/3 of the losses in GDP. So here are my sources, and thanks for listening.